Good evening. We now know the next step in the roadmap to get us through coronavirus over the winter. The current lockdown ends next week, and this afternoon the Prime Minister announced what happens next. Gyms and non-essential shops can reopen, and weddings and religious services can take place again. The rule of six will be making a comeback, and in better news for live entertainment, theatres and concerts can reopen as well. But a new, tougher tier system will be in place, and this is how it will work. In Tier 1, you should still work from home if you can, and Rule of 6 applies indoors and out. In Tier 2, that's a tier we were in before the second lockdown, pubs can only trade if customers have a substantial meal, and Rule of 6 is outdoors only. And in Tier 3, hospitality venues will close apart from takeaways and deliveries, and there'll be no household mixing. So that's a bit of what we do know, but what we don't know is which tier London will be in and what Christmas will look like. Our political correspondent Simon Harris has the latest.
In Soho's empty streets, the Prime Minister's announcement was eagerly awaited.
The national restrictions in England will end on the 2nd of December and they will not be renewed.
But instead of lockdown, it's back to the rule of 6. And if, as expected, London returns to Tier 2, no mixing of households indoors. This was not the Christmas present London's bars, restaurants and clubs were hoping for. Lockdown might be coming to an end. The anxiety about their future isn't. Irene Margheriti has already been forced to close one of her Greek restaurants because of COVID.
We've had a really tough year. A lot of businesses have closed down. We lost one of our restaurants because of the pandemic. So, I'm really worried about the future of this restaurant as well.
The 10 p.m. curfew becomes last orders at 10, throwing out at 11. But that's of little comfort to many bar owners in Tier 2 areas.
In Tier 2, alcohol may only be served in hospitality settings as part of a substantial meal.
For club owner Jeremy Joseph, it means more uncertainty about whether his business can reopen.
I'm paying rent in full for all my venues at the moment with no income. So if we don't reopen in December, our next quarter of rent is all due for 4 venues in December. How am I supposed to pay it?
But for shops, there is a chance to rescue what's left of the Christmas rush. In the West End, they're making plans.
Given that pent-up demand, which we saw a couple of days before the last lockdown, Londoners love to come and see the Christmas lights. So a lot more later trading, up to midnight. Some might do 24 hours. And
London's empty gyms, like this one in Vauxhall, can also come back to life. The fitness industry has finally won its argument about healthy bodies and healthy minds.
About 3/4 of people surveyed have said that actually not being able to use the gym has an impact on their mental well-being. So by being able to get the gyms open, it's really going to help that.
All eyes are now on the infection rates. Havering in East London is now the capital's COVID hotspot, with close to 400 cases for every 100,000 people.
We're not too sure what's driving that. We have predominantly older residents that perhaps provide more child support for the local community, so we wonder whether that has some relation.
The Prime Minister warned of a hard winter, a Christmas that can't be normal, and a long road to the spring.
That's Simon. I've got a few questions for you about today's announcement, but let's take a look at some of those coronavirus figures first, because the average number of new cases across the capital as a whole is 197 per 100,000. Now, as we heard in your piece, the worst affected area at the moment, the borough, is Havering, with almost 385 per 100,000 cases. Now, let's compare that to Richmond, which is the lowest. That's at 116 per 100,000. And Simon, it seems as though our numbers, yes, are high, but not quite as high as some of those worst affected areas in the country.
Yeah, London is nowhere near as bad as some northern areas like Hull, where it's 700 cases of COVID for every 100,000 people. And there is some evidence that it is beginning to slow down the infection rate in London, actually going down in some London boroughs. But that average figure of 197 cases is still well above the 100 for every 100,000 people, which was the trigger for us going into Tier 2, which is why the Mayor, Sadiq Khan, thinks we will be back in Tier 2.
OK, Simon, thanks very much. We start tonight with some breaking news. The government's confirmed plans to allow families to see each other at Christmas, but there are restrictions. From December the 23rd to December the 27th only, 3 households will be allowed to mix. After that, people must return to the restrictions of the tier systems, which are due to be announced later this week. Let's get the latest from our political correspondent, Simon Harris.
Forget 12 days of Christmas. For many families this year, 5 days will be as good as it gets. That's the small window of near normality allowed by the government. From December the 23rd to December the 27th, 3 households can get together.
People want to be with their loved ones, with those close to them, what is the most important holiday of the year. But at the same time, the limits and the restrictions that we're placing, just 5 days and just 3 households, are a way of seeking to ensure that while we can have an opportunity to be with those that we love, it's also the case that we're taking a cautious approach.
The next big decision for ministers is which tier London goes into after lockdown. In Romford today, even outdoors, many shoppers wore masks. The town is in the coronavirus hotspot borough of Havering, and people are well aware of COVID's presence in their community.
Yes, that's why we are wearing the mask. We are trying to do all our precautions which we can do. But you know, every day seeing the count is a little depressing because we can't come out from the home if we will see the figures.
We don't really come out. We only like family, that's it.
That's it, yeah.
So if we do go out, we keep our social distancing, wear masks.
Just keep your hands clean, self-distance, and do the best you can do. If you're going to get it, you're going to get it.
Havering's infection rate is 387 cases for every 100,000 people. The next worst London borough is Redbridge on 301 and Bexley with 264. The boroughs with the lowest infection rates are Southwark, Richmond and Camden. The Mayor, Sadiq Khan, thinks London is most likely heading for Tier 2 restrictions. But there's concern a higher infection rate in some boroughs, like Havering, could be a tipping point for Tier 3. In a statement, the Mayor said London's unique ecosystem of bars, restaurants, clubs and cultural venues have been through an extremely tough year. If they had to close throughout the Christmas period and beyond in Tier 3, it would be a hammer blow that many might not recover from. Andrew Rossendale is one of Havering's Conservative MPs. He opposes lockdown and thinks even the tier restrictions are too extreme.
The death rate is very little difference to what it normally is for this time of year. I have to keep saying this, so why are we in this frenzy? Why are we shutting everything down and turning busy town centres into ghost towns?
We are beyond the point where we can't have any tiers. We had a big lockdown in the beginning which cost us billions. We've now had this shorter one. We cannot squander that work. So if we need to have some rules, of course we should have some rules.
Tier 3 just shouldn't be on the table, and the only discussion that we should be having is Tier 1 versus Tier 2.
Ministers are expected to decide on Thursday which tier London ends up in. Simon Harris, ITV News, Romford.
Good evening. The 7,000 restaurants, pubs and bars in London had waited to see if the announcement about Christmas would bring some good news at the end of a year with little of it. But the decision that you can meet with other households in homes but not pubs for 5 days over Christmas has been met with disappointment and anger, with industry bodies warning Christmas and restrictions in the run-up could mean last orders for thousands of venues. Our political correspondent Simon Harris reports.
Lunchtime at the Plume of Feathers, but nobody's tucking in. Lockdown has left the pub high and dry, trying to survive on selling takeaways. Now this Greenwich local can't even look forward to opening on Christmas Day, thanks to the ban on households mixing in pubs.
We have a lot of passing trade here, but we obviously have a lot of families that come in, so people are seeing people they haven't seen for months on end, and it's just a really jolly 2 hours in here. But obviously this year it's going to be very different, sadly, I think.
At the Clarendon Hotel in Blackheath, they're getting ready to reopen the restaurant next week. They would normally expect 130 people for lunch on Christmas Day, many of them regulars, families who this year will have to do something else.
I've been here serving people's children, and now these children are taking their parents out for Christmas Day lunch. So it is now a worry with the current guidelines over the festive period that these families will not be coming to us for lunch, and the children cannot treat their parents for meals on a very special day.
If London goes back into Tier 2, the rule of 6 will allow friends and families to drink outdoors. Tier 3 bans even this. Bars and restaurants will be restricted to takeaway sales only. The hospitality industry predicts Armageddon.
94% of our businesses in London say they're not viable and could result in full closure, so you're going to see mass job losses. If we're in Tier 2, slightly better news, but you're still seeing 75% of businesses not viable with those restrictions.
At one venue in Docklands, they thought they had an answer to Tier 2 at least. Igloos, bubbles within bubbles, where households could mix. But even that's banned.
We invested in putting 23 igloos here at Skylight precisely for that, because we thought they were a perfect space where you could come down with your bubble and still have the atmosphere of other people around, but actually be protected from them. And so it was really disappointing for us.
Disappointing is one response, but many business owners are furious at being frozen out of a 5-day Christmas truce, which allows 3 households to mix in a house or flat, but not in a pub, bar or restaurant. Simon Harris, ITV News, Wapping.
Good evening. From 1 minute after midnight next Wednesday, Londoners will be living under Tier 2 or high alert coronavirus measures once the national lockdown is lifted. It means pubs, restaurants, theatres and non-essential shops can reopen, but still with many restrictions. Well, today's announcement from the government also came with a warning from the Mayor, urging us all to stick to the rules to avoid moving into Tier 3, which will happen if infection rates continue to rise. Our political correspondent Simon Harris has the latest.
London has been given its route out of lockdown, but it might be a bumpy ride. The high infection rate in some boroughs could have tipped the capital into Tier 3 with the tightest restrictions. Instead, it's back to a revised Tier 2, but with a stern warning from the government.
And there are parts of London where the cases continue to rise, and we need to get that under control. But there are also parts where they are falling, and things are very much going in the right direction. So there's a lot of work to do in London to keep it in Tier 2.
If we ease off now, we risk losing control of this virus all over again, casting aside our hard-won gains and forcing us back into a New Year national lockdown with all the damage that would mean.
On Pinner High Street in North London, coronavirus has already led to the closure of restaurants. One is still hanging in there. Takeaways have been its staple diet during lockdown. For the owner, Faisal, today's Tier 2 announcement was a mixed blessing.
Not a catastrophe, which I think Tier 3 would be, but obviously it's not Tier 1, where we can have more groups mixing. So I think it's going to be hard. I think it's going to be a lot of hard work ahead to reopen and get people back into the restaurant. But I think we can manage. We've managed so far.
From December the 2nd, next Wednesday, all shops will reopen. So too will hairdressers and businesses like beauticians. But in Tier 2, pubs and restaurants will now have to serve proper meals. No households can mix indoors.
My concern is to make sure we continue to follow the rules so we don't inadvertently have the progress made undone and us slip into the conditions that lead to the government putting us in Tier 3. That's why it's really important.
Olufemi Akinola was a care worker who caught COVID and died in April. His son, Lobby, is campaigning for a public inquiry into the government's handling of the outbreak. I spoke to him in a North London park.
My big worry is that we're just going to have a cycle of lockdowns and then peaks of cases, and then we lock down again and peaks of cases, and we're just going to have this continuous increase of death toll. We now have the largest death toll in Europe.
It's 9 months since Arsenal fans were last allowed into the Emirates Stadium, but that's about to change. Next Thursday, Arsenal will become the first Premiership team to allow supporters back in. 2,000 fans will be admitted for the game against Rapid Vienna. Simon Harris, ITV News.
Well, Simon joins me in the studio now. Simon, we saw in your report that warning from Matt Hancock, didn't we? It seems that London got lucky by being placed into Tier 2.
Yeah, a lot of concern before today's announcement that London was heading for Tier 3. There are some boroughs with worryingly high infection rates, mainly in the east and southeast, Havering, Redbridge, Barking and Dagenham and Bexley, which of course rubs up against Kent, which is now in Tier 3. But overall, the infection rate in London is coming down. So London has fared better than some other parts of the country, especially in the north of England. But assuming we don't go into Tier 3, Londoners could probably expect Tier 2 to last at least until the new year.
All right, Simon, thank you.
Good evening, I'm Duncan Golostani. The Prime Minister is facing a growing backlash against his COVID tiers tonight from those who have to live under them and from MPs in his own party who are furious some counties, such as Kent, have leapt from the lowest to the highest. The restrictions will be enforced next Wednesday when the national lockdown is lifted. Dartford will be in Tier 3 and Bexley, which borders it, will be in Tier 2. And as our political correspondent Simon Harris reports, entire streets have been sliced in two.
In Maiden Lane, there's no obvious boundary, just wheelie bins. Anyone with a Bexley bin is in Tier 2, but Dartford bins tell you it's Tier 3 territory, because Maiden Lane is one of several streets in Dartford which straddle the London-Kent border.
I think it's absolutely crazy. How can this side be on Tier 3 and across the road be on Tier 2?
Literally is probably as bizarre as taking parcels in. We've got a parcel for number over the road. Sorry, can't do it.
It's my mum's birthday next week. We can't go and see. We can go for an outside walk with her and my little girl, but that's about it.
From next week, neighbours in this road will be living under different regimes. On that side of the street, people can go out for a meal. On this side of the street, it's got to be a takeaway or a delivery. On that side of the street, people can go to the cinema. On this side of the street, they can't.
It is absurd. It's also very, very frustrating. I think people are fed up, frankly, right around the whole country with the restrictions that we've got in place, and it's deeply disappointing that Dartford is going to be moving into Tier 3 restrictions. We saw the numbers in Dartford rocket before this latest lockdown. The numbers now are slowly starting to come down, which is good.
Tier 3 means pubs and restaurants must close unless they do takeaways. At the Rose and Crown, Christmas is on hold.
Today was planned to put the Christmas decorations up. Those boxes are going to stay there, unfortunately. Hopefully we'll be able to get them up. We'll find out in a couple of weeks' time.
Dartford in Kent has been placed in Tier 3 with an infection rate of 268 cases for every 100,000 people. However, the London borough of Bexley, just next door, is in Tier 2 with an infection rate not far off of 227 per 100,000.
I totally understand why people feel so frustrated, but the difficulty is that if you did it any other way, first of all, you'd divide the country up into loads and loads of very complicated subdivisions. There's got to be some simplicity and some clarity.
COVID-19 has already cost Marion her florist studio in Dartford, so she's working in her back garden. The new restrictions have ended her hopes of organising Christmas wreath parties.
It'll be an afternoon of fun, getting in a complete mess, putting a wreath together, decorating it, a few glasses of mulled wine on the side.
And that can't happen now?
We can't really make that happen because it involves too many people socialising, sharing equipment. It wouldn't be safe for that to happen now.
And that was a big part of your business?
That was more or less the only thing I did in December.
Britain's COVID reproduction rate, or R rate, is now below 1. That's likely to fuel the Tory backlash against new restrictions, but at the same time offer hope that some areas could move to a lower tier at the next review in mid-December. Simon Harris, ITV News, Dartford.